This video was brought to you by Incogni. In just the past few days, the Israel-Hamas conflict has escalated at an unprecedented pace. Israel has dropped over 6,000 bombs on Gaza, and the stage now looks set for a ground invasion in the north, which risks turning Gaza City into a pile of rubble. So, with things escalating at such a rapid pace, the question now on everyone's minds is where, when, and if this war might end. So in this video, we're going to try our best to figure out what might happen next, how this conflict might end, and explain why, unfortunately for everyone involved, there don't seem to be any good outcomes available. As we see it, there are broadly three ways this conflict could end. They are, in order of escalation, negotiation, invasion, and occupation. Let's start with negotiation, by which we essentially mean anything short of a ground invasion of Gaza. This would involve Israel pressuring Hamas into giving up the hundreds of hostages that are apparently stuck in Gaza, using a combination of airstrikes and siege tactics. Now, Israel have already said that the current siege, which includes a ban on food, fuel, and electricity, won't be lifted until all hostages are returned. And considering that Israel control 4 out of the 5 crossings in and out of Gaza, and Egypt is refusing to fully open the 5th one, this means that very little, if any, aid will be getting into Gaza to help its population cope with the effects of the endless airstrikes. As such, there's a chance that a sustained pressure campaign of this magnitude could force Hamas into giving up some of its hostages, or at least entering into good faith negotiations, which could produce a ceasefire. If this happens, then the conflict could end without an actual invasion. Unfortunately though, this doesn't seem likely. Last time that Hamas took a hostage was back in 2005, when Gilad Shalit was captured by Hamas militants in a cross-border raid via tunnels near the Israeli border. Following this, Hamas held Shalit for over 5 years and only returned him in 2011 in return for over 1,000 Palestinian soldiers, including some convicted of multiple murders and of carrying out attacks against Israeli civilians. Hamas have also already said that at least one of their objectives in last weekend's attack was to liberate some of the roughly 5,000 Palestinians currently held in Israeli jails. But given that the Gilad Shalit negotiations took 5 years, successful negotiations don't look likely. Now, things are slightly more complicated for Hamas this time round, because the hostages aren't all soldiers, and some of them are actually foreign citizens. But even if Hamas does reduce their demands, it's hard to imagine them landing on an outcome that's acceptable to the Israeli public, given the current state of Israeli public opinion. In this case, the most obvious escalatory step from Israel's point of view would be a ground invasion of Gaza. Now, as of the time of recording, this hasn't happened yet, but the IDF have already mobilized a record 360,000 reservists, and a ground invasion now looks like a foregone conclusion, given that, as of Friday morning, the IDF are demanding an evacuation of the 1 million or so civilians living in northern Gaza. In this light, the airstrikes and siege described a few seconds ago serve a dual purpose. They function as a pressure campaign, but they also degrade Hamas's military capabilities and soften the strip ahead of an invasion. Anyway, there are basically 2 things that could happen here. The IDF defeats Hamas, or they don't. If they don't, then they'll eventually be forced to withdraw, and Hamas and the IDF will revert to trading airstrikes as they've done for the past 20 years or so. Now, this would be deeply humiliating for both the IDF and Netanyahu, but a brief invasion and then a return to the status quo wouldn't structurally change the region's political dynamics. However, if they were to win and defeat Hamas, whatever that looks like, the IDF will be left with 2 further options. They could either withdraw from the territory and let another Palestinian group take over its administration, or they could fully reoccupy Gaza with a permanent military presence in the area. Unfortunately for Israel though, neither of these are good options. Let's start with withdrawal. The reason that withdrawal doesn't work is because, to put it simply, there's no Palestinian political group capable of ruling Gaza. The most obvious candidate is the Palestinian Authority, a government body based in the West Bank that's dominated by Fatah, the other big player in Palestinian politics aside from Hamas. Now, these two groups really don't get on. Fatah used to control both Gaza and the West Bank until 2006, when Hamas won a majority in the Palestinian legislative elections, with a particularly strong showing in Gaza. A civil war then ensued, and in 2007, Hamas seized control of Gaza during the Battle for Gaza, although the PA and Fatah both still claim the area. Today, though, the PA are deeply unpopular with ordinary Palestinians, especially in Gaza, with polling suggesting that a majority of Palestinians see it as a burden on the Palestinian people, and a majority in Gaza are in favor of disbanding it altogether. Now, this is for a variety of reasons. It's ridden with corruption, its leadership are old and apparently irrelevant to Palestine's youth, and many Palestinians just see the PA as sort of an Israeli shill, which depends on Israel for its tax revenues and has done nothing to protect the West Bank from Israeli settlers or the IDF. Ultimately, this points to a more general problem with Palestinian politics. With Hamas in trouble and the Palestinian Authority utterly discredited, there's no obvious vehicle for advancing Palestinian political interests in and around Israel, which is pretty terrible news for ordinary Palestinians. Anyway, the PA have brought some of this upon themselves, but their perceived illegitimacy is also a deliberate consequence of Israeli policy. Over the past decade and a half or so, Netanyahu has basically ignored the PA, refusing to discuss the two-state solution and sanctioning them whenever they do anything that he doesn't like, as happened earlier this year when the PA asked the UN International Court of Justice to deliver an expert opinion on Israel's occupation of the West Bank. So, if there's no one obvious who can be left to rule after a withdrawal, then that leaves the other option: occupation. Essentially, if Israel can't find anyone to administer the territory, then they'd have to do it themselves. And this might not be impossible. After all, Israel had a permanent military presence in Gaza from 1967 until 2005. But this does look eerily similar to what happened in 1982, when Israel invaded southern Lebanon to install a friendly government in Beirut and purge the Palestinian Liberation Organization. In the end, though, the occupation was a complete disaster, and while the PLO did leave Lebanon in the end, they were succeeded by Hezbollah, who waged a constant and costly guerrilla war against Israel until they finally left in 2000, and are now perhaps Israel's most formidable enemy. The point we're making is that historically, every attempt to wipe out Palestinian resistance has only produced more extreme iterations and more difficult geopolitical conundrums, which makes it hard to really see how this can end in anything good for any side in the equation. A couple of years ago, I was the victim of identity theft, and I only found out when I got a court letter saying that I owed money to a broadband company at an address I'd never lived at. And I'm not alone here either, with victims of data breaches rising by 41.5% in 2022. Now, all of that stolen data is very often being added to commercial databases, with data brokers potentially aggregating your personal information, including your name and aliases, social security number, login credentials, home address, location history, online activity, and more. All of which is available for purchase by businesses and could fall into the hands of criminals too. Fortunately though, Incogni are here to help. That's because Incogni reach out to data brokers on your behalf, request your data's removal, and deal with any objections. Plus, as brokers often continue to collect data even after takedown requests, Incogni continue to keep watch. So whenever a new record pops up on a data broker site, Incogni will automatically take care of that too. And even if you're not worried about your data being stolen, we all deal with endless junk mail and robocallers, both issues that Incogni's services could help cut down. So create an account using our link in the description, grant Incogni the ability to work on your behalf, and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, by using our link, you'll get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Thanks for checking them out, using our link, and thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video.